All right, hey guys. In this one, we're going to talk about the order of operations for putting together a strength training program. Again, there are a few ways you can go about this, but this is kind of the way I conceptualize things, and you might want to give it a shot. This is a paired episode. This is a paired episode with the previous lecture on order of operations for hypertrophy. So if you haven't seen that, give it a look. So with any program that you're going to make for anyone, again, we won't spend too much time on this, but you need to know their needs analysis, so relevant injury history, as well as their goals. Because if you don't know their goals, you don't know what the heck you're going to program. Seems pretty obvious, so we won't spend much time on it. Once you have all that, then you're going to want to, again, identify the frequency. I like to start with frequency because Gen Pop people tend to have schedules and other things going on in their life. I know, it's weird. There's some people say there's life outside of the gym. I don't understand. So identify a frequency that works for them. And then the same thing goes with athletes. So the head coach might say, you can have my guys for 4 days a week for 8 weeks. There you go. You have your frequency locked in, how many times a week you can train. And then from there, you take your highest priority movement patterns that you need to be hitting to have the best transfer over to sport. And you're going to train those with a high degree of volume and frequency. You're going to give a lot of your resources to those movements. So I like to give the example of a lineman. Linemen's coming off the ground need to have a large degree of hip extension strength, a large degree of leg strength, and a large degree of pressing strength. So right there, I know I'm going to want to be hitting deadlifts, RDLs, bench pressing, incline bench pressing, squats, things like that. Those are going to have a high degree of frequency in my program. So you might have hamstring emphasis leg day first. I know when you're doing strength training programs, oftentimes you don't focus it around muscle groups, but this is just one way to conceptualize it. So like hamstring emphasis leg day first, deadlift emphasis leg day first. Second day is going to be incline bench and bench press emphasis push day or upper day. And then you can go upper, lower, ensuring that you're hitting highly specific movements when you are the freshest, because again, you need to be doing strength training when you are the most fresh, because strength and power are skills that you need to some degree show off to develop. If you're beaten to the ground and sore all over and you can only lift 60 pounds where you can only lift 100 pounds, you're not going to be gaining much strength there. Just like with hypertrophy, specificity is very, very important. But I would even argue to a degree that for strength, specificity is even more important. So making sure that you're hitting movement patterns that train the target muscles in target movement patterns, using target energy systems and rep ranges that are relevant to their sport. So an example that's kind of silly that we use is the NFL Combine bench press test to see how many times they could rep out 225 on the bench. That tells me how endurant and roughly how strong an athlete is, but I don't really love that test. Whereas if you were to give me a bench press test where they had to hit a set of 3, a set of 5, something like that, that tells me a lot more about what the athlete is capable of in terms of something relevant to football. Same way, I wouldn't necessarily care how quickly my lineman can run a 5K, right? Not relevant at all. Okay, next you're going to be determining how you want to progress and your starting volume. You're usually going to want to start this at a maximum adaptive volume measurement. So the strength training volumes are going to be a little bit lower than the hypertrophy volumes. And we'll talk about a little bit of a way to troubleshoot this a little bit later, because volume still is important in strength training. So whereas hypertrophy might float between that 10 to 20 sets per week, strength training is probably going to be a lot lower in this regard. And identify the rep ranges that you want to work in. So athletes should probably spend a lot of time between the 3 and 6 rep range, kind of floating up to 8 sometimes, and every now and then floating below 3. Where a lot of people kind of mess this up is they think because load is the most important thing for strength training, they automatically go to sets of 1, 2, and that might not be the best use of your time. Developing strength in sets of 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. Is going to develop a lot more of what we call basic strength that's more widely applicable to a lot of things they need to do, while also improving their one rep max strength significantly. Another way you can choose load in this instance is going off of % 1 rep max, where you can say, okay, week 1, I'm doing 80% of my 1 rep max, week 2, 85, week 3, 90, week 4, 92.5 or something. So a much more aggressive approach there, and you gradually decrease the volume as that program goes on. You're going to want to, over time and over your blocks, monitor your strength increases. And this is going to tell you a lot about your volume, because we know the load is there, right? Because we're progressing all the way up to 92.5 or doing sets of 3 to 5, etc. So if you go through a block of training and your strength didn't go up, you might need to increase your volume a little bit. Provided if you're feeling extremely beat up at the end of your training cycle, you might find that your volume is actually too high. So that's kind of a way to tell that. But if you're not feeling beat up and you didn't get stronger at the end of your strength training block, you might want to consider adjusting volume up. One thing to note about this that's really, really important, you want to test your strength in the same week of different mesocycles. So strength block, week 1. You can look at one of those exercises, how you performed on sets of 5 on bench. Block 2, week 1, bench press, how you do on sets of 5. That can tell you a lot without needing to necessarily do 1 rep max training. Something really relevant to talk about here is with strength training, because strength is a skill that you need to express at a high level. You kind of need to show off to develop it. You're probably not going to get your best stimulus to the amount of input that you get in by going to failure. The literature shows pretty clearly that failure training is not so great for strength, but a lot better for hypertrophy training. Once you kind of get to the top end of your either predetermined mesocycle length or kind of where you hit the top end of your loading range, like you can't add more load, etc., deload, repeat, kind of rinse, recycle, repeat. And now analyze your strength. If it went up, good, repeat, see what you can do. Oftentimes, strength training changes with your volume need a block to kind of tell us if the strength improvement was there. Whereas hypertrophy, you can kind of look at things more like pumps, disruption, soreness. Because if those are there, you're probably growing muscle. With with strength training, we definitely need to see kind of how much load you're lifting, right? So you oftentimes need to weight a block. Oftentimes for strength training, if you're using that heavier model that we talked about, more of that limit strength training, you're going to use that percent 1RM model. So go from 85% 1RM to 87.5, 90, etc. And what actually happens in that instance is you're going to aggressively be adding load each week, and your total reps completed actually goes down. This isn't an exact number, but you can kind of use this as a frame of reference. So week 1 at 85% or 80%, we're doing, let's say, 4x4. I'm making it up. 4x5. Who knows? 20 total reps. Week 2, when you jump up to 85%, big load adjustment there. Big load jump. Reps are going to decrease from 20 down a little bit. So now all of a sudden, maybe you're doing 4x4, 16 total reps. And then when you go to 90%, it might be 4x3, 12 total reps, etc. Something like that. Those load jumps in comparison to the rep range and your percent 1RM aren't exact, but you kind of get the logical idea of the structure. Rating of perceived exertion on a 10-point scale also works pretty good for strength training. Whereas RIR, reps in reserve, which we use a lot for hypertrophy standard, I would argue it's the gold standard for it, kind of fails on a few metrics. There is a big difference between 1 RIR and 2 RIR. And that might be the difference between a RP8 and an RP9, like in terms of relative effort. So once you get really, really heavy with RIR, it becomes not so useful, and I recommend RPE or percent 1RM. Generally in strength training, your progression plan is going to be load focused, sometimes at the expense of volume, sometimes not. Again, if you're sticking more in that basic strength rep range, like that sets of 3 to 6, it doesn't always have to come at the expense of volume. You can use kind of the dual progression model in strength training. So you're going in there, you're hitting triples with RP of 7. Week 2, you're going to go to an RP of 8, and that gets you to 4 or 5 reps. Week 3, you're going to go to an RP of 8.5 or something. That gets you to 6 reps, so you add load. And then week 4, this gets you to an RP 9.5, not total bar stopping failure, and that gets you to 4 reps with more load. So that's a way you can kind of use the dual progression model there. Again, staying away from total muscular failure. You can go to RP 10 where you're still completing the rep, but total muscular failure where the bar actually drops down and you fail it is a lot more fatigue for the benefit that you're getting. Leave testing like that to meets and meet prep. Again, if progress halts, check your volume. If you're really beat up, you might need to deload. If you feel fresh as all get out, your volume might be low. You might need to make those changes on that program. And one nuanced discussion with strength training is that volume sweet spot is a little bit more fragile and a little bit harder to pinpoint. Whereas you can look at pumps, disruption, soreness with hypertrophy training, you need kind of block to block data with strength training to kind of know. Hopefully this helps, and hopefully you can kind of take this and start applying these strength training principles to make your own programs for strength athletes or sport athletes. And just a final thought, remember, athletes, especially sport athletes, benefit a lot more from the basic strength rep ranges than always focusing on limit strength training, where that develops your ability to be strong in that specific movement for a single. So it has a lot more carryover to powerlifting, whereas a set of 3 is going to have a lot more carryover to athleticism. Hopefully that helps.